Chapter 43 of History of the Jews in America. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. History of the Jews in America by Peter Wiernik. Yiddish Literature, Drama, and the Press. Yiddish poets of the United States equal, if they do not excel, the poets of the same tongue in other countries. Morris Rosenfeld, Yehoash and Sharkonsky, Bovshower and other radicals, Zunzer, old-fashioned novelists, the sketch writers who are under the influence of the Russian realistic writers, Abner Tannenbaum, Alexander Harkavy, Krantz, Hermalin, Zevin, and others, Abraham Goldfaden and the playwrights who followed him, Jacob Gordon and the realists, Yiddish actors and actresses, the Yiddish press, the high position attained by the dailies, weekly and monthly publications. Judeo-German or Yiddish literature has attained in this country a respectable state of development, and some of the better work done here compares favorably with the same kind of work in Russia. This is especially true of poetry and of the drama, though the first consists mostly of ballads or short lyrical songs, and the last rarely goes beyond adaptation. Morris Rosenfeld, born in Russian Poland, 1862, arrived 1886, is considered the best Yiddish poet in the New World, and some of his works have been translated into English and several other European languages. Solomon Bloomgarden, Yehoash, born in Virbalin, Russia, 1870, arrived 1892, is hardly less gifted, and the songs of Abraham M. Sharkonsky, 1867 to 1907, rank with the best in the language. The late David Edelstadt, Morris Vinchevsky, born in Russia, 1856, arrived 1893, and I. Bovshower, born in Russia, 1874, incapacitated by sickness, 1899, are the radical poets, in whose songs the tendency often overshadows the art. The old, popular bard Eliakim Zunzer, born in Vilna, Russia, about 1840, arrived 1889, has written some excellent songs since he came to this country. The most Jewish, and in some respect the greatest, of all Yiddish songwriters, Abraham Goldfaden, born in Russia 1840, deceased in New York 1908, belongs as a poet, even more than as a playwright, to the old world. Of the old-fashioned novelists, Nahum Meyer Sheikovitz, Shomer, born in Russia 1849, deceased in New York 1905, Moses Seifert, born in Vilkomir, Russia, about 1850, arrived 1887, and the Hebrew poet Dolitsky are the best-known representatives. Those who follow new methods are mostly sketch writers under the influence of the Russian realists, and they include, among others, Jacob Gordon, born in Russia 1853, arrived 1890, deceased in New York 1909, Bernard Gorin Goido, born in Lida, Russia 1868, arrived 1893, Leon Kobrin, born in Russia 1872, arrived 1892, Z. Libin, born in Russia 1872, arrived 1893, and David Pinsky, all of whom have also written for the stage and for various periodicals. Of the numerous writers, or rather translators and adapters, of long sensational stories which appeared serially in Heften or in newspapers, and later in bulky volumes, only one, the originator, deserves to be mentioned. This one is Abner Tannenbaum, born in Shirwent, Russia, 1848, arrived 1887, the most useful Yiddish writer in America. His easy style made his writings intelligible to people who were not used to read at all, and he has thus helped to create the large audience whom he has been instructing for more than 20 years by his translations of stories containing much information about the physical and technical world, like those of Jules Verne, and by his innumerable articles on popular scientific and historical subjects. Alexander Harkavy, born in Novogrudok, Russia, 1863, arrived 1882, has done much useful work for the Jewish immigrant from the Slavic countries in another direction, by writing a number of manuals of the English language, Yiddish English, Russian English, Hebrew English, dictionaries, vocabularies, phrase books, conversation books, letter writers, etc. He has also contributed much to Yiddish periodicals and edited several of them, including the Hebrew American Weekly, New York, 1894, in which the Yiddish text was translated into English line by line. Philip Krantz, pen name for Jacob Rombro, born in Podolia, 1858, arrived 1890, is the author of several instructive works, including A History of Culture and an English Teacher for Jews. David M. Hermalin, born in Vaslin, Romania, 1865, arrived 1886, has written and translated a number of works of a variegated character, from treatises on metaphysical subjects to extremely realistic stories. Israel J. Zevin, Tashrak, born in Russia, 1872, arrived 1889, who has developed a typically American Jewish humor, has published a collection of his humorous stories and descriptions of life among the semi-Americanized Jewish immigrants. Similar collections by other humorists, like A.D. Ogus and D. Apotheker, deceased 1911, have also appeared in the last few years. Benjamin Feigenbaum, Dr. Abraham Caspi, and other radical propagandists have written many books and pamphlets of a quasi-scientific nature, mostly with the object of expounding their theories to the masses. B. R. Robbins was the publisher of A History of the Jews in Yiddish, the only work of that nature compiled in America. The popular orator, Hirsch Masliansky, born in Slutsk, Russia, 1856, arrived 1895, is in a class by himself as the author of a book of Yiddish sermons, 1908. The Yiddish drama, which grew less independently than any other part of its literature, attained its freest and highest development here. The melodramas and operettas of Abraham Goldfaden, several of which were written in this country, still remain the best pieces in the entire Yiddish repertoire, and bid fair to survive the more serious works of the later period. A large majority of the plays written or translated or adapted for the Yiddish stage in the United States belong to the same class as the Goldfaden plays, and in many of them his influence is clearly discernible. The most productive and successful playwrights of this class are, in order of their priority in this country, Joseph Latiner, born in Romania about 1855, arrived 1883, Moses Horvitz, born in Stanislaw, Galicia, 1844, arrived 1884, deceased in New York, 1910, and N. M. Shaikovich, and recently his son, Abraham S. Schomer. Rudolph Marx, Rodkinson, Feynman, and Tomaszewski, the actors, Seifert, Sharkansky, Hermelin, Solatarevsky, Anshel Shore, and others have written occasionally, with more or less success. Jacob Gordon was at the head of a more serious school of Jewish dramatists in America, whose effort to introduce, also by translations and adaptations, the problem play, the psychological play, and the realistic play on the Yiddish stage began a new epoch, which is now practically ended. His good style and technique ensured for some of his pieces a considerable popularity for a time, and they are now much played in the revived Yiddish theater of Russia. Z. Libin and L. Kobrin were for a time his most consistent followers, and several other literary men have attempted to follow in his footsteps. But aside from the temporary popularity of some plays, the school itself, which was founded on Russian ideals and conceptions, could not take root here. Bernard Gorin and David Pinsky have also written plays that possess literary merit, and so have several others who cannot be classed as followers of the new school. The most talented actors and actresses of the original troupes, which the founder of the Yiddish theater, Goldfaden, organized in Romania, Russia, and later in Austria, came to this country at various periods during the last 3 decades. They, together with other able players and managers who learned much from their American colleagues, have brought the Yiddish stage here to a higher state of development than it has reached in other countries. The most prominent among them are Jacob P. Adler, born in Odessa 1855, arrived 1886, and his wife Sarah; Sigmund Mogilevsko, born in Bessarabia 1858, who arrived about the same time; Mrs. K. Lipson; Mrs. Bertha Kallick, who has left the Yiddish for the American stage; Boris Tomaszewski, born in Kiev 1866, arrived 1881, and his wife, Bessie; David Kessler; Regina Prager, Madame Lobel; Bernard Bernstein; Moscovich; Thornburg, deceased 1911; Mrs. Epstein; Mrs. Abramowitsch; Blank, Lickman; Fishkind, Graf, Gold, Mr. and Mrs. Tobias, Mr. and Mrs. Tansman, and others. Moritz Morrison, the German actor, occasionally appears on the Yiddish stage, and lately Rudolf Schildkraut, a native of Romania, who was for some years prominent on the German stage in Europe, has settled as a Yiddish actor in New York. Almost all the authors of Yiddish works mentioned above, and many of the playwrights, have written, or are still writing, for the Yiddish press, which has attained here its highest development. Influenced by the example of the American newspapers, the Yiddish press has, in the last 2 decades, by the directness of its appeal, by the attention it pays to news and questions in which its readers may be interested, and by keeping in touch with the current of life, reached a height far above the level of Yiddish newspapers in countries where their potential audience is much larger. The Jewish Gazette of New York is now the oldest periodical in the world which is printed in Hebrew characters, and the younger popular weekly, Der Amerikaner, established in 1904, has probably outdistanced all Jewish magazines of the past and the present. The Yiddish daily papers occupy the front rank among the foreign language newspapers in the United States in regard to circulation, probably because the sufferings of the Jews in the Slavic countries causes the immigrant Jew to remain interested in periodicals which bring the news and discuss the questions of his old home country longer than is the case with non-Jewish immigrants. The oldest of the Yiddish dailies is the Jewish Daily News, now edited by Leon Zolotkov, founder and for many years editor of the Jewish Courier of Chicago, established as a weekly 1887, daily since 1891. The next in age is the Volksadvocate, which was published as a weekly in 1887, from which grew the Daily Jewish Herald, 1894, which in 1905 became the Wahrheit, edited by Lewis Miller. The Socialistic Forward, of which Abraham Cahan is the editor, was established in 1897, and, like the other two, appears in the afternoon. The Jewish Morning Journal, the fourth New York Yiddish daily, was founded in 1901 by Jacob Saferstein, born in Bialystok, Russia, 1853, arrived 1887, its present managing editor, and it has also a Philadelphia namesake, under the direction of Jacob Ginsburg. The Jewish Press of Chicago, the Jewish Daily Press of Cleveland, Ohio, and the Jewish Daily Eagle of Montreal, Canada, of which Reuben Brainin is the editor, complete the list of Yiddish daily papers in America. Of the weeklies, the Free Arbeiter Stimme, established 1899, is mildly anarchistic. The Jewish Labor World, established in 1909, is the organ of the Chicago Radicals. Der Kibitzer is the oldest of the humorous illustrated periodicals appearing in New York. There are also several trade papers, like the New Post of the Garment Workers and Der Yiddish Backer of the Bakers Union, etc. The conservative Volksfreund, edited by Joseph Selig Glick, has appeared in Pittsburgh since 1889. Das Yiddish Volk is the Zionist organ, established in New York 1909, and now edited by Ab Goldberg, and Der Yiddischer Record of Chicago began to appear in 1910. The monthly Zukunft has had a checkered career since 1892, while Chonan J. Minik's Yom Tov Bladder has appeared several times each year since 1897. A class of professional writers and editors, some of them specialists of marked ability, grew up to supply the needs of the Yiddish publications, especially of the daily newspapers. Besides those mentioned above, it includes, among others, Gedalia Bublik, J. L. Dalidansky, William Edlin, L. Elby, J. Enton, Jacob Fishman, Dr. Fornberg, Joseph Friedkin, Israel Friedman, J. Gonickman, Dr. B. Hoffman, S. Janowski, E. and N. Kaplan, Z. Kornblith, A. Leeson Wald, Jacob Majidoff, Chaim Malitz, Abraham Reisen, Bernard Shelvin, Joel Slonim, Nathan Sovereign, J. M. Wolfson, Dr. Chaim Zhitlovsky, and Israel Zioni. Of those who departed this life, M. Buchansky, 1841 to 1904, and John Paley, 1871 to 1907, deserve to be mentioned among those who contributed to the advancement of Yiddish newspaperdom in America. End of Chapter 43. Read by Marissa D. Six, Largo, Florida, July 18th, 2023.
Chapter 44 of History of the Jews in America. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Larry Wilson. History of the Jews in America by Peter Wiernik. Present Conditions. The Number and the Dispersion of Jews in America. Conclusion. Dispersion of the Jews over the country and its colonial possessions. The number of Jews in the United States about 3 millions. The number of communities in various states. The number of Jews in the large cities. The number of the congregations is far in excess of the recorded figures. The process of disintegration and the counteracting forces. The building of synagogues. Charity work is not overshadowing other communal activities as in the former period, and more attention is paid to affairs of Judaism. The conciliatory spirit and the tendency to federate. Self-criticism and dissatisfaction, which are an incentive to improvement. Our great opportunity here. Our hope in the higher civilization, in which the injustices of the older order of things may never reappear. Jews are living at present, 1911, in every state and territory of the United States, and there are small communities in Hawaii, Puerto Rico, and the Philippine Islands. There are some forms of Jewish organizations, synagogues, lodges, or cemetery associations, in more than 750 separate localities, from places where there is only a minyan on the high holidays at the beginning of the Jewish year, to the immense Jewish community of New York City, which is estimated to consist of nearly 1 million souls. Wherever actual figures as to the number of Jewish inhabitants in smaller places and the number of synagogues in larger cities are obtained, they are usually far in excess of the published figures and estimates, and there seems to be justification for placing the number of Jews in the country at not far below 3 million, if not actually at that number. While the largest communities, as well as the largest number of communities, remain in the East and the Middle West, the dispersion is much more extensive than is generally supposed. There are, for instance, nearly 40 cities and towns in Texas which have Jewish communities. Other southern states like Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Virginia have each about or nearly half that number, and Arkansas, Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Tennessee about 10 each. Each of the new states of Arizona and New Mexico have 3 or 4 Jewish communities. Oklahoma has 5. Florida in the extreme south and Maine, the furthest north, each have about a half dozen. California has more than both of them together. Washington has 3 and Oregon 1. Of the other far western states, Utah has 2 communities, Montana 2, Nevada 1, Idaho 1, Wyoming 1, and Colorado 9. Coming to the nearer western states and toward the border states, we find 4 communities in Nebraska, 8 in Kansas, 12 in Missouri, 13 in Iowa, 8 in Kentucky, and 5 in West Virginia. North Dakota has 5, Minnesota 8, while Wisconsin with 19 and Michigan with 24 show the result of proximity to the great central states where Jews have been settled in considerable numbers for the last 2 generations. Among those states, Illinois has the greatest number of Jews, owing to the great community of Chicago, while the number of cities containing Jewish communities, 23, is somewhat smaller than that of Indiana, which has 26, and of Ohio with its 27. We notice the same in the 2 greatest states in the East, where, if we consider Greater New York City as one community, the number of places containing Jewish organizations is slightly less than in Pennsylvania, which has 62 such places. New Jersey has more than 40, and of the New England states, Massachusetts leads with 35, and Connecticut is second, having 20. Rhode Island has 7, Vermont and New Hampshire 4 each. The list is completed with 1 community in the District of Columbia, 5 in Maryland, and 1 in Delaware. Philadelphia and Chicago are, besides New York, the only 2 cities which contain about 1,000 or more Jews each. Boston has about 3/4 of that number, Baltimore, Cleveland, and St. Louis about 50,000 each, and after them come in order named Newark, San Francisco, Pittsburgh, and Cincinnati, with about 30,000 each. Detroit, Buffalo, Providence, and Jersey City, each having about half of that number, while Rochester, Syracuse, New Haven, Milwaukee, Louisville, New Orleans, and Kansas City belong to the class which have 10,000 or more. The twin cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul would belong to that class if they were considered as one, which they really are. Washington, the national capital, belonged to the class of cities having between 5 and 10,000 Jews, which includes Albany, New York, Columbus, Ohio, Dallas, Texas, Denver, Colorado, Fall River, Massachusetts, Hartford, Connecticut, Indianapolis, Indiana, Los Angeles, California, Memphis, Tennessee, Omaha, Nebraska, Paterson, New Jersey, Portland, Oregon, Scranton, Pennsylvania, Seattle, Washington, and Trenton, New Jersey. There are some old and important settlements containing less than 5,000, but the number which would have to be included in a class of communities of that size is too large to be mentioned. Congregations are continually being organized, and synagogues built in localities where none existed before, thus showing a gradual dispersion of Jews to all parts of the country, while new houses of worship in the large cities usually owe their erection to consolidation or to the settlement in new neighborhoods. But only the buildings which are entirely devoted to religious services are apt to be noticed by those marking records or gathering statistical material, while the small congregation which worships in a private dwelling is usually overlooked. The statistics about Jewish congregations in the United States are for this reason more defective than the figures about any other phase of Jewish activity, and the total given by the above-mentioned yearbook for 5669, page 65, i.e. 1745, for the entire country should be doubted to be nearer the truth, even if the lowest estimate of the number of Jews in the country is accepted as the most probable one. It must be admitted that a process of disintegration is going on, in which the pessimist sees something worse than a transformation or readjustment to new conditions in a new world. It is, on the other hand, obvious that a strong effort is made to counteract the forces of dissolution. The various elements of the community, representing many countries and different strata of immigration, are coming together in a conciliatory spirit, as if instinctively impelled to cooperate. The widespread activity in the building of synagogues, in which many whose attitude was formerly indifferent and even hostile now participate, is only one phase of the attempt to preserve Judaism in this country. Much is done for charity and for Jewish education, the latter receiving more attention than ever before. The public school systems of most of the larger cities, following New York's example, have taken over the largest part of the work which was done before in Jewish institutions to Americanize the immigrant. Not only the proportion, but the actual number of the dependents on charity is decreasing, and while the needs of Jewish charitable institutions are still great, more attention can now be paid to specifically Jewish matters than at the time when the problem of the material wants of the immigrants was overshadowing every other communal activity. The attempts to organize on a more general scale and to consolidate or federate existing organizations, which are frequently made and are more often successful than in preceding periods, are the clearest manifestation of the spirit of the times in American Jewry. In most of the large cities outside of New York, the important local Jewish charities are now federated, and the plan of federation is continually gaining in favor. The federations, of which there are now more than a dozen, and many other benevolent institutions of large and of smaller communities, are represented in the National Conference of Jewish Charities of the United States, organized 1899. There is also noticeable in our communal life, as in American public life in general, that tendency to self-criticism which often degenerates into slander, that eternal dissatisfaction with things accomplished and with present conditions, which implies a sincere desire to achieve still better results. While this discontent and the poor opinion which many of us have of the spiritual condition of the Jews in America are of immense value as incentives to improvement, it dims the eye of the foreign observer, especially if he comes from a country where complacency and self-praise are the rule. It may still be too early to summarize the communal activities of the Jews in America, or to attempt to indicate how far we have approached the solution of the most pressing problems. But signs of throbbing life are visible everywhere, and the interest of the individual Jew in Jewish affairs is increasing. There is, therefore, every reason to believe and to hope that the opportunity which is afforded here to set the Jewish house in order, the best and perhaps the first in the diaspora, will be utilized to its full extent by the future generations of Native American Jews. We are happy to have no Jewish problem here, in the sense in which the term is understood in the backward countries of the Old World. We need not waste a part of our best energies in repelling attacks from an anti-Semitic press or a Judophobe party, and our usefulness to ourselves as well as to our neighbors is thereby enhanced. Members of strange and hostile races and nationalities get along together in this country much better than anywhere else in the past or the present time, and their native children emerge from the melting pot united by a patriotism and a desire for improved conditions and improved relations which characterizes the American. The secularity of the government and the diversity of religious beliefs preclude the spread of the denominational bigotry which is the real cause of the persecution of the Jews in other countries. While the liberty and equality which are vouchsafed to every citizen must themselves be lost before the unfavorable conditions which prevail elsewhere can confront us here. The Jew can become an American and at the same time preserve his religious distinctiveness, which he can lose only by his own negligence or disloyalty. Let us hope that those who now earnestly work to strengthen and build up Judaism in America will be successful, and that the fate or divine providence which has preserved us for thousands of years brought us here to participate under new circumstances in the advancement to a higher civilization in which the injustices of the older one may never reappear. End of chapter 44. End of History of the Jews in America by Peter Wiernik.